Good morning. So we're starting Aristotle. We mentioned him a little bit last class, but today I'll try to get a little bit deeper in. The first thing I brought up was the square of opposition. That's not the first thing he does. Aristotle, well, I should show you all the things he's written here. Let's go up. So on the right here, you can see the works by Aristotle, at least that are on this website. The understanding I have is that they believe that Aristotle wrote lots of other things that have been lost. In fact, he's credited by some ancients with having written better dialogues than Plato, but those are lost. And so, at least at the moment, until they find more things, maybe digging up Egyptian mummies or something, the works of yes.
Has anybody who was around him during that time talked about him? Like things we didn't know about the works that we can recover?
There's lots of stuff about all of these guys that we have in written records one way or another. The problem you have with that stuff is some of it is believable because people knew them. Other aspects of it sounds like they were just trying to make their friend look good. An easy comparison is with Jesus. When you think, what do we know for sure about Jesus? Well, there are the Gospels, but a lot of there's a lot more Gospels available actually than the ones that were in the accepted Bible, the New Testament. But when you look at all the other things, a lot of it is clearly written afterwards, has a particular point of view, might not have anything to do with Jesus, etc. And so, when you go back into the ancients, you get all that kind of stuff. The same thing with Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar. There's all kinds of stuff written about them. Pontius Pilate. Believe it or not, there's a gospel according to Pilate. What do you make of that? That's kind of crazy. So yes, there is, but and you can spend a lifetime really studying these folks, but most of us don't. Because of course, we pick up the things that we consider to have been important, and heck, we're just going to talk about Aristotle today and Monday. And then we're going to move on to the post-Aristotelians, because this is an intro class. I'm just trying to, touch the surface of what we've got out there to introduce it. And if you get interested in some of these folks, there's plenty of stuff out there. You don't even have to go to the libraries anymore. Of course, you could just search on the internet. However, looking at what we've got by Aristotle that is accepted as Aristotle. He wrote a constitution for Athens that they never used. That's kind of fun. Hegel wrote a constitution for Germany and they never used it. So that's kind of the categories. Now, when we think about the categories I think are the most significant way of thinking about Aristotle's philosophy, because what he tries to do is describe everything, including language. And so when you read the categories and other books about the way language works, like on interpretation and so on, he describes grammar, what we think of as the nouns, the subjects of sentences, the predicates, the adjectives, the different kinds of things that we can break language down into. And he does that with everything. So if you notice, he also talks about dreams, what kind of dreams people have. What do dreams mean? Do they mean anything? On the gait of animals, how the different animals walk. No, imagine going out there and this animal walks, you know, hop, 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 you know, whatever. On generation and corruption, that's birth and death. You know, birth and death, right? On the heavens, this is, of course, the stars and the planets and so on. And Aristotle did believe that the earth was the center of the universe, but he did believe that it was round. And at the time, their measurement for the earth's, you know, size was just about really close, considering how they measured it. The history of animals. And how many of you had a chance to watch those videos on Aristotle's Lagoon? I highly recommend it if you get the chance. It's beautifully done, and it's all about his you know, year or two while he lived in Lesbos and ended up studying the fish and everything and trying to figure out and categorizing all of the fish. So the speaker in those videos, who's a biologist, talks about him inventing biology, basically, and wondering why don't we still go back to Aristotle? You know, so many biologists don't think about Aristotle. Well, he did make a lot of mistakes because he didn't have a lot of our contemporary information, but he was the one that started categorizing things this way. On interpretation is also on language. In fact, I'll let's go and take a look at it for a little bit, just so you can see what I'm talking about. So, well, what is a verb? What is a noun? And when you say, I'm denying this, you know, not, you know, using not. When I'm using affirmation, etc., proposition, sentence, etc. So he's talking about the way words work. And if you think about it, he's disagreeing with Plato's philosophy, arguing that all these ideas that Plato thinks somehow are abstract and eternal, unchanging, and structure the world is wrong. Instead, he points out what we're talking about with all these ideas are words. These are words. How do the words work? What are we doing when we're putting all these words together? So he wants to study how the language works when he's doing that, right? How to live a long life instead of a short one. He lived till he was about 68. It's pretty interesting. On memory and reminiscence. So I think people have been thinking about how to improve their memory way longer than this. So this is just his summary, really, of thoughts about memory. I think some of the stuff about the memory palace, I think, comes later. But metaphysics. Metaphysics is that which follows the physics. And we'll look at that a little bit. Meteorology, that's weather. So he's describing the different kinds of weather. On the motion of animals, the gait of animals was one thing, but the motion of animals in general is another. We'll also, for next class, talk about the Nicomachean ethics. And ethica is the Greek word for character. How do you make yourself a good character? And remember, with Plato, he thought that everybody was born and their soul was already the kind of character and had the kind of virtue that they came with. You know, it wasn't something you could learn. You were that way from the beginning. Aristotle takes the completely different point of view that basically it's nurture. So how you get, you know, raised by your parents is going to be the most important part of creating an ethical or a good character, right? The parts of animals. Physics is nature, and he's writing about it. Politics, he describes the different kinds of governments. Posterior analytics is about logic, and analytics is how you analyze things, and posterior is the conclusions, really. The prior analytics would be also logic, but those would be the things that are prior to your conclusions. So those are your premises, basically. Prophesizing by dreams, rhetoric, how to become an orator and persuade people, of sense and the sensible, it's kind of fun. He actually comes up with what he calls the common sense. We have all these different senses, and how do we know that the thing we see, taste, touch, etc. is all the same thing? There must be some part of us that puts all of our senses together, and he called that the common sense. How to sleep. You can't get to sleep. He wrote about that. The sophistical refutations. So he's the one that invents logic, or at least codifies it in a way that we've used as the beginnings of a logic course ever since. And he, once he has this, goes back and he looks at the dialogues of Plato and others and points out where they were not very logical, where they made all sorts of logical errors, right? On the soul. Remember, for Plato, the soul is that which has no parts. It's invisible, abstract, etc. Well, we definitely have a soul. So if you don't believe in abstract things as actually existing, what the heck could Aristotle have considered the soul? You'll love this, I think. For Aristotle, the soul is the activity of the body. The activity of the body. So if it's moving and stuff, well, that's the soul. Of course, the problem with that is, once the body ends up no longer moving, well, what's the soul? Well, actually, the soul is the soul of a body that's no longer moving. I'm still puzzled by Stuart Hameroff, the anesthesiologist that I talked about last class, saying that he could put plants to sleep. I just find that really, how do you know when a plant is asleep? I don't know. What's a plant asleep like? And why would you do that? Before you cut it? No. Do botanists put plants to sleep before they trim them or something? Sorry, that could have been funny, maybe. Topics. I forget what topics is all about. Virtues and vices, on youth and old age, on life and death, on breathing. You get the idea, I think. He wrote about everything, God bless you, in a very boring way. It was fun thinking of Socrates, the famous inventor of saying the wrong thing to the right people, etc., as an asshole. Aristotle is famous for boring people to death, because if you read his stuff, that's exactly what happens. So if you're having trouble sleeping, I highly recommend reading Aristotle. And he writes a lot. And he was a reader. Plato used to call him the bookworm. So there's some other things he was called. I think I mentioned that he was born in Stagira, which is in northern Greece, and so they call him the Stagirite. Was one thing. He also liked to teach while walking around, and so they called his school the Peripatetic School, which means walking around while you're teaching and stuff. There's a famous bit that while he was walking along and people knew that one of his definitions for a man was a featherless biped. We don't have feathers and we walk on 2 feet. So he called us a featherless biped, and at least the story is that a student plucked a chicken and threw it over the wall in front of him while he was walking along. Sounds pretty miserable, Pluck chickens, that can't be very much fun for a chicken. But in any case, they're making fun of his definition of a man. But here, at the very beginning of metaphysics, he says, all men by nature desire to know. All men love to know. We're all curious, I suppose. I don't know if he actually met enough people. I think there's a lot of people out there that aren't really that curious. I don't know. Maybe there are. Maybe they've been ruined by their experiences or something. But that's interesting. And as a result of this, I love to say